The sky had changed. Not the color, still that same dull gray over the old military base, but the feeling. Before you could hear birds, distant traffic, the wind through dry grass. Now it was silence, broken only by the low hum of alien tech and the occasional metallic footstep on concrete. Earth wasn't destroyed. It was just taken. Quietly, efficiently, like someone picking up a forgotten tool and slipping it into their pocket. The beings who did it called themselves the Velan, tall, smooth-skinned, with eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. They didn't shout, didn't rage. They just observed, studied, and laughed. Soft, clicking sounds that came from their throats when they thought no human was listening. At observation post Theta 7, a group of them stood near a reinforced glass wall, watching the humans inside the holding area. Most of the detainees sat quietly, heads down, eyes tired. Some paced. One old man sat cross-legged near the far corner, eyes closed, hands resting on his knees like he was meditating. He wore faded fatigues, no rank, no insignia, just a worn-out cap pulled low over his forehead. "He's been like that for 3 days," said one Velan, tapping a datapad. "No food request. No complaint, just sitting." Another chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. "Typical human. They invent stories to fill the silence, ghosts, gods, spirits watching over them, as if emotion could change physics. They say their soldiers carry their dead with them," added a third, mimicking a human voice in a mocking tone. "My brothers are still with me." Ridiculous. Death is deletion. Memory is inefficient data storage. They all laughed again, the sound echoing slightly in the sterile hallway. To them, humans were fascinating but flawed, like watching ants build castles out of sand only to wash away in the next rain. They'd scanned human history, read their books, watched their films. They knew about courage, sacrifice, faith, but they saw it all as noise. Chemical reactions. Survival programming gone poetic. Inside the holding area, the old man opened his eyes. Not because he heard them, he couldn't, but because his body knew when it was time. He stood slowly, joints creaking, and walked to the small sink in the corner. He splashed water on his face, then looked at his reflection in the scratched metal mirror. His face was lined, weathered by sun and wind and things he never talked about. His eyes, though, those were sharp. Still alert, still watching. He wasn't special, not on paper. No medals on display, no grand title. Just a man who'd served, come home, and tried to forget. But forgetting never really worked. Not when you'd seen what he'd seen. The Valens had taken Earth without firing a single shot. Their ships appeared in orbit one morning, and by noon every weapon system on the planet had gone dark. No explosions, no cities burning. Just a calm global announcement. Resistance is unnecessary. Cooperation is optimal. Most governments surrendered within hours. The Valens didn't enslave anyone. They just managed, like zookeepers tending to curious animals. But they were curious about certain humans. The ones who didn't break easily. The ones who stayed quiet but didn't seem broken. That's why the old man was here. Not because he'd fought back, he hadn't. But because during the initial scans his brain patterns showed something odd. Under stress instead of panic or despair, there was focus, calm. Like he'd been here before. Back in the hallway, the Valens moved on, their boots clicking against the floor. One lingered for a moment, glancing back at the old man through the glass. "Do you think he believes in ghosts?" he asked his partner. "Of course he does," the other replied. "All humans do. It's how they cope with their own fragility." Inside, the old man sat back down. He didn't look at the glass. He didn't need to. He could feel their eyes. He'd felt eyes like that before, in the mountains of Afghanistan and the dust storms of Iraq. Watching, waiting for you to crack. He closed his eyes again. But this time he wasn't meditating. He was remembering, not in a sad way, not in a haunted way, just remembering the sound of boots on gravel. A voice saying, "Watch your six, man." The smell of coffee brewed over a campfire at 3 a.m. Laughter in the middle of nowhere, because if you didn't laugh, you'd cry. He didn't call them ghosts. He didn't pray to them, but he kept them close. Not in some mystical sense, just in the way a sailor keeps a compass. They pointed him true. The Valens would never understand that. To them, memory was just data. But to him, memory was company. It was strength. It was the reason he could sit here, in this cold room, under alien eyes and not feel alone. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling a loose panel on the roof. The old man didn't flinch. He just sat, breathing slow and steady, like he was waiting for something, or someone. The Valens walked away, still chuckling about human myths. They didn't know it yet, but their laughter wouldn't last much longer. Because soon, they'd see something they couldn't explain with data or logic, something that didn't show up on scans but changed everything, and it would start with this quiet man, sitting in the corner holding on to the past not as a burden, but as a shield. For now, though, it was just another quiet afternoon under alien rule. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretched across the concrete floor, and the old man stayed still, eyes closed, heart steady, surrounded by voices only he could hear. The routine at Observation Post Theta 7 never changed much. Same gray walls, same hum of machines, same quiet shuffle of humans being moved from one room to another like pieces on a board. But something had shifted since the old man arrived. Not in the air, not in the rules, but in the way the Velan guards looked at him. Less like a specimen, more like a puzzle they couldn't quite solve. One morning, a younger Velan researcher, leaner, with brighter eyes, was assigned to run neural response tests on the detainees. His job was simple: hook them up to sensors, run simulations, record fear spikes, stress patterns, anything that showed how human minds broke under pressure. Standard procedure. Boring, really, until it was the old man's turn. They led him into a small white-walled room with a single chair in the center. Wires snaked from the ceiling, ending in soft pads that would stick to his temples and chest. He didn't resist, didn't ask questions, just sat down like he'd done this 100 times before, which in a way he had. Not with alien tech, but with memories that played on loop in his head, sharp as broken glass. The simulation began. At first it was just sound, distant gunfire, wind howling through rocky passes. Then came the visuals, projected directly into his mind through the neural link. A dusty village, crumbling walls, heat shimmering off the ground. It was Afghanistan. Not a guess. Not a generic war zone. His war zone. The one he hadn't spoken of in over a decade. The Valens watched from behind one-way glass, data scrolling across their screens. They expected panic, sweating, elevated heart rate, maybe even tears. That's what happened with the others. But the old man? His breathing slowed. His hands resting on his knees stayed steady. No tremor, no flinch. What's he doing? The lead researcher muttered. Maybe the simulation isn't strong enough, another suggested. They turned up the intensity. Now the sounds got closer. Explosions, shouting in Pashto, a radio crackling. We're pinned down. Need evac now. The old man's eyes stayed closed, but his jaw tightened just slightly. On the monitor, his brain activity spiked in areas linked to memory and spatial awareness, not fear. It was like his mind wasn't reacting to danger, it was planning. Then something strange happened. The simulation glitched. Not a system error. Not a power surge. The visuals shifted. Suddenly, standing beside a broken-down Humvee was a young soldier with a crooked smile and a bandana tied around his head. Another leaned against a wall, lighting a cigarette that wasn't there. These weren't part of the program. The Valens hadn't coded them in, but the old man saw them. A small breath escaped his lips. Not fear, not sorrow, recognition, he's seeing people. The young researcher whispered, eyes wide. People who aren't in the simulation. The lead Valen scoffed. Impossible. It's a controlled environment. He's hallucinating from stress. But the data told a different story. His cortisol levels, the stress hormone, were dropping. His heart rate stabilized. His body was calming down because of what he was seeing, not despite it. Inside the room, the old man opened his eyes slowly. He looked around, not at the white walls, but at the space where the figures stood. He gave a small nod, like he was saying hello to old friends. Then he whispered something too quiet for the mics to catch. Later, when they reviewed the audio, they found it. You made it back. The young researcher, the one who'd been quiet until now, leaned forward. He's not hallucinating. He's remembering. And to him, it's real. The others laughed again, but this time it sounded forced. Nervous. He's just an old soldier, the lead said, crossing his arms. His mind's playing tricks. Humans do that when they're broken. But the young one wasn't so sure. He'd read the files. This man hadn't broken. Not during the war, not during capture, not even now. If anything, he seemed stronger when the past came calling. That night after the tests ended and the old man was returned to his cell, the young researcher stayed behind. He replayed the footage over and over, watched how the man's shoulders relaxed when the ghosts appeared, how his fingers twitched like he wanted to reach out. He thought about his own people. The Valens didn't mourn. When one of them died, their consciousness was uploaded into the collective archive. Clean, efficient, permanent. No tears, no rituals, just data. They considered it progress. But watching this human sitting alone in a cold room, finding comfort in memories of the dead, it made the researcher wonder, was forgetting really better than remembering? The next morning, the lead Valen called a meeting. "We'll run another test," he said firmly. "Deeper immersion. Full sensory deprivation. If there's something real here, we'll expose it as biology, not myth." The young researcher didn't argue, but as he walked back to his station, he glanced toward the holding area. Through the glass, he saw the old man sitting exactly as before, back straight, eyes closed, hands resting lightly on his knees. Peaceful, unshaken, and for the first time since the occupation began, the young Valen felt something unfamiliar. Doubt, not about their technology, not about their superiority, but about whether they truly understood what made humans human. Later that day, while reviewing old military records, he found a note in the man's file, scribbled by a human officer years ago. Never saw him panic. Even when things went bad, said his squad was always with him, not in spirit, in practice. The researcher stared at those words for a long time. Outside, the wind blew again, carrying dust across the empty parade grounds. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called, rare now but still there. Life hadn't stopped. It had just changed shape, and in that small white room an old soldier sat waiting. Not for rescue, not for freedom, just for the next moment, and the voices that walked with him through it. The Valens thought they were studying weakness, but maybe, just maybe, they were standing in the presence of something they couldn't measure, something quiet, unbreakable, and deeply human. And soon, they'd be forced to face it head-on. The days passed slowly inside the detention block, but the old man didn't seem to mind. He ate when food came, drank when water was offered, and spent most of his time sitting quietly in the corner. To the guards, he looked like any other broken human, worn down by time and defeat. But the young Valen researcher had started watching him more closely, not with suspicion but with curiosity. There was something in the way the man moved, deliberate, calm, like every breath had a purpose. One evening, after lights out, the researcher stayed behind, pretending to review data. Through the observation feed, he saw the old man do something unusual. He sat up straight, faced the wall, and began speaking, softly, steadily, like he was reading a list. At first, the researcher thought it was prayer, but there were no chants, no holy words, just names: Reyes, Martinez, Chen, O'Donnell. Each name came with a pause, a breath, sometimes a small nod, then a few words. Always shared his rations. Sang off-key but never stopped. Watched my back and Helmand. The researcher leaned closer to the screen. He'd never seen anything like this. No ritual, no ceremony, just quiet remembrance. He checked the audio logs. This happened every night. Same time, same order, like clockwork. The next morning, during a routine check-in, the researcher took a risk. He entered the holding cell alone, holding a data pad like it was just another scan. The old man looked up but didn't speak. Just waited. "Why do you say their names?" the researcher asked, voice low, almost hesitant. The man studied him for a long moment. Not with anger, not with fear, just weighing. Then he said, "Because they're still here." "Here? In this room?" "No," the man said, tapping his chest lightly. "In here, in how I move. How I think, how I stay calm when everything's falling apart." The researcher frowned. "But they're gone. Dead. Your species doesn't preserve consciousness like we do." The old man gave a small, tired smile. "You don't need to preserve a voice to hear it. You just need to listen." He went on to explain, not in grand speeches but in simple words. He didn't believe in ghosts floating in the dark. He didn't think his friends were watching from some afterlife. But their lessons, their jokes, the way they carried themselves under fire, that stayed. It shaped him. When he was scared, he'd hear Reyes say, "Oh, breathe, man. One step at a time." When he felt alone, he'd remember Chen sharing his last cigarette in the freezing rain, saying, "We're in this together, brother." "That's not magic," the old man said. "It's memory with muscle. You carry it so it carries you." The researcher was silent for a long time. Back home, death was clean. Upload, archive, move on. No pain, no longing. But also, no connection. No one said your name after you were gone unless it was for official records. No one kept your laugh alive in their chest. He thought about his own mentor, a senior scientist who'd guided him through training. When she passed, her data was added to the archive. He could access her research anytime, but he couldn't remember the sound of her voice, or how she used to hum when she worked. Those things were gone, deleted by design. Now watching this human, this old soldier, he felt a strange ache. Not sadness. Something deeper. Like he'd missed something important his whole life. Over the next few days, the researcher started visiting more often. Not for tests, just to talk. The old man never asked why. He just answered what was asked in that same steady voice. He spoke of sandstorms that blinded you for hours, of nights so quiet you could hear your own heartbeat, of the weight of a rifle after 3 days without sleep. But he always came back to the people. They weren't heroes, he said once. Just regular guys trying to do right by each other. That's what got us through. The researcher began to understand. This wasn't superstition. It wasn't myth. It was discipline, forged in loss, polished by time. The ghosts weren't spirits. They were choices. Every time the old man chose courage over fear, patience over panic, he was honoring them. Not in words, but in action. One afternoon, the lead Valen caught the researcher talking to the detainee. He pulled him aside, voice sharp. "You're wasting time. He's just an old man clinging to delusions." "Is it a delusion if it keeps him whole?" the researcher asked quietly. The lead scoffed. "Emotion clouds judgment. Memory distorts truth. We evolved past that." "Maybe," the researcher said. "But what if it's not about truth? What if it's about strength?" The lead didn't answer. He just walked away, but his steps were heavier than usual. That night, the researcher sat in his quarters staring at a blank screen. On impulse, he opened a new file. At the top, he typed a name, his mentor's. Then below it, he wrote, "She hummed old songs when she worked. Always kept extra tea in her drawer for trainees." It felt strange, unnecessary, but also, right back in the cell, the old man finished his list. He said the last name, Vasquez Conde, and added, "You taught me how to tie a proper knot." Never forgot it. Then he lay down, pulled his thin blanket over his shoulders, and closed his eyes. Outside, the stars were out. Same stars humans had looked at for thousands of years, wondering if they were alone. Now aliens walked among them thinking they had all the answers. But in this small room, an old soldier held on to something they couldn't scan, couldn't measure, couldn't replicate. Not magic, not myth, just love, turned into armor. And the Valens, for all their power, had no defense against it because they didn't even know it existed. The researcher saved the file. He didn't know why. Maybe just to remember that some things aren't data. Some things are lived. And passed on. Not in code, but in quiet moments, whispered names, and the way one man sat in a cell unbroken, because he refused to let his brothers fade. Tomorrow, they'd run another test. But tonight something had already changed. Not in the facility, not in the rules, in the silence between heartbeats where real strength lives. The order came down quietly like everything else the Valens did. No shouting, no drama, just a message on the researcher's screen. Subject Theta 7A to undergo deep immersion protocol. Full sensory isolation. Neural stress threshold test. The lead Valan stood nearby, arms crossed, expression unreadable. If his so-called strength is real, he said, it will show under true pressure. If not, we'll finally prove it's just chemical noise. The young researcher didn't argue. He just nodded. But inside his stomach tightened. He knew what deep immersion meant. Total darkness. No sound, no touch. Paralytic agents to stop movement. So the mind couldn't distract itself with fidgeting or pacing. Just pure, unbroken isolation with fear triggers layered in. Most humans broke within minutes. Some screamed. Others shut down completely. They led the old man to the chamber, a smooth, egg-shaped pod lined with soft gel. He didn't resist. Didn't ask questions. Just stepped inside like it was another day on patrol. The door sealed with a soft hiss. Lights dimmed. The hum of machines faded into silence. Outside, the Valens watched the monitors. Heart rate, brainwaves, muscle tension, all normal at first. Then the triggers began. First cold, deep bone-chilling cold like being buried in snow. Then the sound of distant gunfire. Then voices, distorted, panicked. "We're hit." "Medic, where's the medic?" The old man's breathing slowed. His heart rate dipped slightly. Not panic, not flight. Focus. Then came the worst part, the simulation of loss. Not just danger, but betrayal. A comrade turning on him. A radio call going silent mid-sentence. The feeling of being utterly alone. This was where others shattered. But inside the pod, the old man did something unexpected. He began to speak. Not loud. Not frantic, just a low, steady murmur like he was talking to someone only he could see. "Easy now. I've got you." Then, "Stay sharp, check your left." Then, "Yeah, I remember that joke." Still terrible. The monitors flickered. His brain activity shifted. Theta waves spiking, the kind linked to deep memory and calm awareness. His immune markers, usually suppressed under stress, actually rose slightly. Endorphins flooded his system. It made no sense. Biologically, he should have been crashing. Instead, he was stabilizing. The lead Valon leaned forward, eyes narrowed. He's hallucinating again. But the young researcher shook his head. No, he's not seeing ghosts. He's calling them. On the screen, the old man's lips moved again. "Reyes, you always said the dark wasn't empty. Said it was full of voices if you listened right." A pause. Then softer. "Thanks for showing me how." The researcher's breath caught. This wasn't breakdown. It was connection. The man wasn't escaping the fear. He was walking through it, guided by memories so real they acted like hands on his shoulders. The simulation ramped up. Darkness thickened. Sounds twisted into screams. The pod's temperature dropped further. But the old man didn't flinch. He started reciting coordinates, grid references, call signs, medevac protocols, things he hadn't used in decades. Clear, precise, like he was back in the field, coordinating a rescue. He's functioning, the lead Valon muttered, disbelief creeping into his voice. Under full neural assault, the young researcher finally spoke up. He's not fighting the past. He's using it. His memories aren't haunting him, they're helping him. For the first time, the lead didn't dismiss it. He stared at the data, at the impossible calm in the numbers. Human biology didn't work this way. Stress should weaken, fear should paralyze. But here was proof, quiet, undeniable, that something else was at play. Inside the pod, the old man closed his eyes, not to shut out the world, but to go deeper into his own. He pictured his squad around him, not as they were in death, but as they were in life. Tired, joking, watching each other's backs. He felt Reyes's hand on his shoulder during that sandstorm in '09, heard Chen's laugh after a near miss with a roadside bomb. Remembered how Vasquez always shared his last piece of chocolate, saying, "Gotta keep your strength, brother." Those weren't just stories. They were tools, anchors, and in the void of the pod, they held him steady. After 47 minutes, far longer than any human had lasted, the lead Valon finally gave the order. End the test. The pod opened. Cool air rushed in. The old man blinked slowly, disoriented but calm. He looked at the Valens, then at the young researcher, and gave a small nod, like he knew they'd been watching. They helped him out. His legs were weak from the paralytic, but his eyes were clear. He didn't say a word. Just walked back to his cell, step by step, like nothing had happened. But everything had. In the control room, silence hung heavy. The data didn't lie. Under extreme duress, the man's body had responded not with collapse, but with resilience. His mind hadn't fractured, it had focused. And the source? Not technology. Not training alone. But something deeper. The living presence of those he'd lost, carried not in databanks, but in daily remembrance. The young researcher looked at his superior. "You wanted proof it wasn't myth." The lead Valon didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quieter than usual. "We came to study weakness. But maybe we've been looking in the wrong places." That night, the researcher didn't go to his quarters. He sat in the observation room, watching the old man through the glass. The man was sitting cross-legged again, eyes closed, lips moving silently, naming them, one by one. And for the first time, the researcher didn't see delusion. He saw devotion, discipline, a kind of strength his people had forgotten or never known. He opened his personal log, typed a new entry. Not data, not analysis, just words. Today I learned that memory can be a shelter. That love doesn't end with death, it becomes a compass. Outside, the wind blew across the empty base. Stars blinked in the sky, and inside a small cell an old soldier sat in the dark, surrounded by voices only he could hear, but whose presence changed everything. The Valons had come to Earth thinking they understood life, death, and mind. But in this quiet moment they realized they'd missed the most human thing of all, that sometimes the strongest armor isn't made of steel or code but of names, whispered in the dark to keep the light alive.